New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and it is time for the Inclusive Church. Every Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, we come together and explore a little bit more about what it means to be inclusive in our spiritual communities. If you're a regular viewer, then you already know I purposely use the word church because I am trying to reclaim it to mean the community of people who come together to learn together, share together, explore and demonstrate spiritual practice together, and move away from the idea of defining the word or the word church, defining the building that we might be in to do those things. Because so much nowadays is virtual. And even if it's not virtual, it is in all different kinds of environments. And so Inclusive Church really is about ministry and about the ministries that you are part of. And today the focus is going to be a little bit on succession planning in an inclusive church and why it is so important to think about that before you need to, and to build that in as you are building your strategy for being inclusive and how to demonstrate that. Let's see, is there anything else I want to say about that before I get into that? Yes. So again, in case this is your first time or first or second time, when I have a featured guest on Inclusive Church, then I tend to go 50 to 55 minutes and use the full hour. When it is just me, like today, I shoot for 30-ish minutes, a little more, a little less, so that we can focus on one topic, one idea, one theme, one tip, one technique, and then release you back into your busy day. So, having said that, I want to preview for you that in September, every week, we'll have one or two featured guests. And so if you've been getting used to this 30-ish minutes, because I've not been doing guests, I've been doing Toolkit Tuesdays the last couple of months. And through August, I will. But in September, every week will be going right up to a full hour because actually looking at and talking about the book, Finding Refuge, Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief. And we'll be doing that in the context of healing collective grief and why that is so important. Why that is so important in our churches that are committed to being inclusive. And so we'll be diving deeply into how grief plays a part when you are trying to bring people from different ethnic groups, different age groups, different sexual orientation groups together. And but today we're going to talk about succession planning, and I want to say hi to Anita. Anita says hi to me and to all of you. And Marjorie has already dropped a really fabulous question into the chat that um, that is, what do you think it means when a church that declares to be radically inclusive offers its membership only one candidate to succeed a minister who's been there for decades? What's up with that? Well, I can't respond on behalf of the church that you might be referring to, but I can speak to this question about numbers of candidates and what is required and what demonstrates inclusion or not. So stay tuned for that. We will talk a little bit about that. So, what is succession planning? I have learned over the years that people think of succession planning in a lot of different ways. That in general, there's some continuity, that it means to plan for the successor to the current leadership or the current structure. And we see that in any organization. It's not unique to churches, right? A business plans for what will happen if the CFO is terminated, or the CFO quits and goes to another company, and who's going to come in, or the CEO is going to retire. What do you do? Or a nonprofit community organization, same thing, right? If the chief HR officer leaves for any reason, who are you putting in place, or who are you preparing to step into that role, or how are you preparing to replace that person, even while they're currently doing a great job? And this is so important in our churches because we often don't do it at all. We think, oh, well, Tracy is the minister and she loves it and we love her. And Tracy's going to be in that position forever. Doesn't matter that Tracy is 84 years old, but she's going to be in that job forever, right? Because we're so happy and comfortable. It also works the other way around, interestingly enough. I know of a few communities where the minister has been there for a while, and there are a lot of people, there's been a lot of turnover, like people will leave the community, and right, or there are people who are there, but the assumption is this minister is going to be here until they die, or until whenever. And so that's just the way it is. So they don't do succession planning either. Succession planning is a healthy way to prepare the community and to ensure that the community will continue. But so many of our churches are minister centric, and they're based on the personality and the preferences or desires or style of the minister. And so if you don't do succession planning, in general, that's not a good thing. But I'm going to be focusing on why succession planning is critical for your commitment to inclusion. If you want that to continue, then you absolutely need to be thinking about succession planning overall. Okay, so a few points about that. So, why succession planning? I've already said some of this. You want to maintain your commitment to inclusion. Number two, you want to expand the demonstration of that commitment over time. So if you don't do succession planning, what often happens is you end up going backwards when there is a change in leadership, because people kind of have to catch up, or they don't even know what they don't know. And then if you want to do succession planning so that you don't lose any progress, and you can expand the demonstration of that commitment to inclusion in different ways now that you have different leadership, without having to go back and recreate everything from scratch. And number three, why succession planning? Because it will force you to build inclusion into all your policies and all your practices and the way that you do things. So it's not dependent upon the person who is the minister now. It's not dependent upon one person or, one group. So it's really important, in my opinion, it is really important that you take a breath, and if you have the ability to influence the existence of or the enhancement of succession planning in your church, that you keep these things in mind. So here's some common mistakes that happen in spiritual communities related to planning for their commitment to inclusion to continue beyond the current leader. So I've heard communities say, oh, well, we don't really need to think about this. We've done really good work, and everyone here is on board with being inclusive. And that could be true in that breath and in that moment. Maybe you just finished a big initiative and you got a lot of feedback and a lot of participation. But a year later, if you haven't done anything else, some of those people have left, new people have come, and this idea that everyone's on board is tricky. I won't say it's not true, but I'll say you have to be careful about whether or not that is something that you can actually defend, right? So, every second one on the left hand side, well, everyone knows how important this is to us. It's in our mission statement, or it's in our purpose statement, or it's in our staff handbook, right? Everybody knows. No, everyone doesn't know anything in our churches. Everyone does not know how important things are. And things change from quarter to quarter, year to year. And so whatever is being talked about the most probably is what people think is important. Common mistakes. Not recognizing or failing to recognize that inclusion is foundational. And so the mistake is that inclusion becomes situational, not foundational. So there was a Black man who was killed while in police custody last week. And so we're doing a prayer vigil this week, right? Oh, when there's a situation that occurs, then we do something about it that proves that we are inclusive, right? Or, we had a local election and there was a lot of enmity, a lot of really angry talk, and there's this polarity that happened, and it's showing up in our community, in our city, based on division, based on race. And so we are going to stand in our truth that it is not spiritual. It's not spiritually true, but even though it's happening in the human, and we're going to make sure people know that because we are inclusive. Situational. Now, when it's foundational, because you are being inclusive based on your spiritual teachings about oneness, or your spiritual teachings about harmony, or your spiritual teachings about unity, then it is true that you will also respond to situational circumstances. But throughout the entire year, you have been laying this foundation that a foundation that is foundational. Did I really say that? Yeah, I did. that you will use your spiritual principles as the foundation for everything you are doing, and you will also show up um, naturally out of integrity at times when there are circumstances. Um, a couple more examples of that come to mind, but I think you probably are with me and following where the point I'm trying to make there. On the right hand side, the minister or spiritual leader is the primary visible leader for the focus on inclusion. That's a common mistake. And then what happens is when that minister leaves, people begin to think, oh, well, that was just their issue, right? Oh, that was Tracy's thing. She was all about inclusion, and now Tracy's gone. So, yeah, it's important, but it's not as important as some other things. And so when the minister is always the spokesperson, when the minister is always the example, or the minister is the only one who speaks about it from the platform, when the minister is the one who's on social media saying this is why we're doing this or this program, or going up to this event, or marching in the Pride Parade, or if that's the only person who the congregation or the community sees and hears talking about inclusion, then it's not only a common mistake, it is a huge mistake. And maybe, I won't say it is the biggest mistake, I will say it's number two. If I had to say the top, 10 mistakes, it would definitely be number two. Number one would be that you didn't ground the whole initiative in the spiritual teaching of your church. That's number one. Number two would be that the minister is the only spokesperson or the primary spokesperson, so that people then think it's their personal thing. And then the last common mistake is on the right hand side at the bottom. There's limited awareness of how inclusion is used to select staff leaders and presenters, musicians who are going to be on the platform. Right, that if people don't understand that you are paying attention to inclusion of different kinds of people, different types of people, um, consciously, even though they may see it, it's unconscious. They just see it. They don't really recognize how intentional you are about that with when selecting staff, or when selecting volunteer leaders, or requiring volunteer leaders of different ministry teams to have diversity on their teams, not just two or three people they are comfortable with. If people are not aware of that, the common mistake is that there's limited awareness of how important that is in the selection of people who are in leadership roles or public presentation roles. So if that's not done, then what happens, of course, is that when the minister leaves and that's not been documented, that's not clear, then people, not because they're trying to reverse anything, they just use whatever they know or whatever they may have been exposed to at work or at another church, and it will erode the progress that you've made, because we all know, and research has corroborated, that what we tend to do is we tend to hire or invite or choose people who are most like us, unless we have a specific process that pushes us to look further, or if we've been trained to look beyond our own individual or small group comfort. And it's really surprising to me how many people just don't even think about their unconscious bias or their prejudices or their stereotypes about someone who's lived in a certain place. And it's like, oh, but you don't know if that's true about this person. Did you interview them, right? Or when you interviewed them, were you aware that you already had this idea that they might show up in a certain way because of their gender identity or because of their age, generational group? So those are some of the common mistakes, and I'm going to share with you 4 minimum required actions, and that I have shared with different churches, because I think if you do at least these 4 things, when there is a change in leadership, then you have a better chance of maintaining any progress you have made, and you will have laid the foundation for that progress to continue and to evolve. So 4 things for you to keep in mind. Number 1, before you're dealing with succession, this is part of your succession planning. Engage all staff and all leaders in demonstrating commitment to inclusion. And that may mean that they are speaking about it, or when you have the opportunity, you make sure that you have different leaders making the connection between your spiritual foundation or your spiritual values and beliefs, and how that demonstrates or shows up as inclusion. Number 2, you want to have a variety of leaders be the face of inclusion on a regular basis. Now, this one can be tricky, because sometimes, at least a half dozen times, people have said, oh, well, we do that. We have someone who's Black, and we have someone who's white, and we have someone who is in their 20s, all on the platform. No, I don't mean to be the token, like showing up, the face of inclusion here, just because they're visible on the platform. Especially that when people tell me things like that, often it's because everyone on the platform is white except their musicians, right? And so it's kind of like, well, we did that so that we would have some diversity. Yes, but you're also showing people that the quote unquote diversity you value is in the people who are entertaining or serving the congregation, not necessarily a part of the congregation. That's a whole nother conversation. So have a variety of leaders be the face of inclusion on a regular basis. So that means you have different people talk about inclusion at different times of the year as part of whatever they're doing. If I have a young adult who is doing announcements, and yes, they may be doing an announcement about the young adult group you are trying to form, but they are also being the face of inclusion because you want to prepare them to talk about how having young adults serves the community, right? Or the benefit of having young adults. So they're not just showing up as an example, but they're linking it to what is important. During Black History Month, you want to be sure that you have some people who are white, Hispanic, or Asian speak to the importance of Black History Month, not just invite every week to have a different Black speaker, because you're demonstrating that you or your church is committed to inclusion. And so it's being the face of inclusion on a regular basis, both in what's being said and done, but also in linking it to the why. The third highlight: document policy and practice that integrates inclusion into selection and evaluation processes. This applies to selection, evaluation of staff, of volunteer leaders, of the teams that the leaders have, the speakers you invite to speak, the musical guests that you invite to perform or play, the program content that you have. document the policy and practice. I helped a community, this was a few years, 4 years ago to be exact now. I helped a group define what does it mean for us to select our visioning team. And we want to make sure that we have diversity and that we are inclusive in that diversity. So we don't just have diversity, but we build in a value of that. And so we actually mapped out whenever we are selecting people for the visioning team, we want to make sure that this was within CSL. So we want to make sure that in the language of Centers for Spiritual Living, CSL, that there is at least one minister, one practitioner, and one laity person, diversity in those roles. We want to make sure that the overall team, when we decide how many people are going to be on this team, that the overall diversity also makes sure that it's more people from more than one racial ethnic identity group, and that there are people from different generational groups as well. We wrote into the process or policy or practice, we wrote in that if it is possible, we want to have at least two people who are bilingual, English and one other language, so that we could serve in a different way and incorporate that in. It seems like there is another thing that we wrote in, but we wrote it in, we documented it, and then we selected people, or they selected people as they sent out requests for people who were interested. They said, we can teach you visioning. We can teach you visioning, and you need to have had this. You had to have at least had the foundations class, but we could teach you everything else, especially with visioning. And in the selection process, then after they had, 30 applicants, then in selecting, they could prioritize not only based on who I know, but these other qualities and characteristics we want to keep in mind. Now, let me be really clear. It wasn't, except for minister, practitioner, laity, there was no specific number. Oh, you will have 2 Black people and 3 white people and 1 Asian, right? It wasn't that. It was before you finalize the team, you want to make sure you have racial ethnic diversity, you have diversity based on sexual orientation if you know it, if that is shared. You want to have diversity based on generational group. And so you're creating a team where this diversity is important. And then you have a pool of people that you can use as replacements along the way. So that was documented. And the person who was leading the team when that was created is no longer with that group. However, the guidelines are there. And that has also been done with a couple other groups in that particular church with some modifications. It's not exactly the same, but they've documented it. The point here is, at a minimum, document how you include that in everything that you do. And obviously that's critical when you're talking about staff and when you're talking about hiring the next person in the succession plan to replace a staff member or to replace the spiritual leader or senior minister. If that stuff isn't documented, it might as well not exist, because it may go out the door with the person who is leaving. And then number 4, speak to the alignment of inclusion with your foundational spiritual principles and practices. And if you have ever watched Inclusive Church before, you know that Tracy gets on her soapbox about that, and doesn't say it quite every week, but I'm sure at least once or twice a month it creeps into my conversation, because we can't forget that if we don't connect our commitment to be inclusive with our spiritual truths, then people in our churches will connect it to what they are hearing in the news as political motivation or demotivation. And if you or in your church or your community are only being inclusive because it is political, then you're doing it for the wrong reasons. And I would rather you not do it at all. So, what finally do I want to share with you? And then we'll go to Marjorie's question. So, in picking the successor, now in general, I was thinking about selecting a minister that you are, filling an open position for. But this would also be true if you're in a larger church and you have staff. It would be true about every staff member. And when you are thinking about your board of directors for your church, it is also applicable there, especially. Could be applicable in a lot of your ministry teams if you have large teams, but it's critical with the spiritual leader, key staff, and your board. So be cautious about limiting the future based on the past or current norm. So that will go not just for inclusion, but definitely you don't want to say, well, I'm looking for someone who talks about inclusion the same way Tracy did, because you're limiting them into this box, and we know principle is not bound by precedent, and there are so many different ways that inclusion can be driven in your spiritual community. Number 2, be sure to include demonstrated commitment to inclusion in the selection process. I'm shocked at how often people are like, oh, well, yeah, this is a great candidate, and I'll be like, so what did they tell you about inclusion? And they look at me like, oh, we didn't ask them anything about inclusion. Well, how do you know they're going to support what you're saying that you have been doing? Well, yeah, we told them about what we've been doing, and they were excited about it, and they thought it was really good. But what examples did you get from them of how they have been inclusive in their past experience? Oh, we didn't really ask that. Because, if they're going to come here, that's who we are. And they're going to just have to be that. So I hope you're laughing the way that I laugh when people say that, because it's like, no, they're coming and you're hiring them and they're going to do the job the way they know how to do the job. And number 3, don't forget to evaluate the ability to deal with inclusion-related challenges that are natural, that are necessary, and are part of being inclusive. You are going to have conflicts as the more inclusive you become, and you want a leader, or you want a staff member, or you want board members who actually know how to navigate that, who have the communication and conflict resolution skills specifically as it relates to being inclusive. So don't wait till after the person is in the position to find out they don't know what to do or how to do it or who to call for help. Included in the selection process. And that means having some real examples of conflict that shows up that is culture-based or culture-related, and then listening to or watching how they respond to that. Because if you are committed to being inclusive, those things are going to happen. So right now, I would be closing right in my 30-ish, 35-minute-ish goal for Toolkit Tuesdays. But I think that Marjorie asked a really, really important and valuable question. And so I want to spend maybe 3 or 4 minutes talking about that. What do you think it means when a church that declares to be radically inclusive offers its membership only one candidate to succeed a minister who's been there for decades? So there are a lot of things I could think it means. I could think it means that the selection committee did a really good job of screening through candidates and offered the best candidate from whatever the slate of candidates might be. I could think that there were a lot of candidates who were really not qualified at the same level, and to offer them to the community would be, in in my words, a waste of time, because their quality level or their skill level was so much lower than the candidate or candidates who were presented. I could also think that it means that the community is is open to input, being radically inclusive, and is not married to that one candidate, even though they're the only candidate being presented at that time. So ultimately, in a radically inclusive community, it's the community that gets to have a voice. And so, if the community is radically inclusive and it has been demonstrating that all along the way, then what would happen would be, in an ideal world, what would happen would be that if the community said, oh no, this person isn't going to fit in here, or this person doesn't meet the standard we're looking for, in a radically inclusive community, people are accustomed to speaking up and sharing their voice and their view. So if there was only one candidate and the community was like, yeah, this isn't the one, then that candidate would not be selected. And the board would have to go back and start a second process or a third process in order to move forward. So I don't think that there's any meaning to take specifically from there being only one candidate, unless there is something that has been said or done that implies, oh, like, we don't trust you all to make a good decision, or we've already pre-decided this person, it will be the next one, and you all are just rubber stamping. But in a radically inclusive, using this language, a church that declares to be radically inclusive, if it is that, then there is the space for voices who to be heard. And I would trust that any voices, that there were a significant number of voices saying, yeah, y'all got it wrong. Yeah, nah, this isn't the one. If there were a significant number of voices saying that, that the leadership or the selection committee would have to take pause and then do what we do in inclusive communities. Come back and say, hey, we got to tell you, there was not clarity here, and this is what we're going to do next. So I love this question, because I think one of the things that happens in inclusive communities is that we have to balance a couple of things. We have to balance our individual feeling of being included, respected, valued, and then we also have to look at how that is modeled and demonstrated throughout the year. Is it just a one-time thing or one special program? Or is there a pattern that actually says, hey, guess what? We are serious about inclusion. It shows up here and here and here and here and there. And that's when you know all of the work that you're doing to be inclusive is creating a culture within the community that is no longer about us versus them, who's right and who's wrong, but what are we building together? And that is the primary purpose of the Inclusive Church Show. We try to give you ideas and tips and techniques and things to think about so that you can contribute in your church. Not just the attitude, but the behaviors that support being inclusive year in and year out. And that's all for this week's show. My name is Tracy Brown. This is the Inclusive Church. I'm so glad you joined me today. And I hope you'll join me again next Tuesday at noon Mountain Time, right here on the New Thought Media Network.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.